district, and he was the co-chair of the MIDS work group for many years, and Mike Eisenby with the Middle St. Croix Watershed Management Organization. And I believe Jay Michaels is going to start it off. You ready?
No.
We had some technical problems this morning, as usual with WebEx.
No. Now it works. Are you guys ready?
Yes, you can go out there now.
All right, I can go out there now. All right. Well, you know, this is actually hilarious because as I was putting the slides together, a lot of the slides are coming from slides that 20 years ago when I worked at the Pollution Control Agency and we were going through NPDES phase 1, going to phase 2 with Mike and Todd and all of us. You know, these all used to be on a slide tray. And I, you know, so this was these are the first slides that we ever moved over to a electronic version of it, and it was so shaky that I would always carry my slides in the back of the car just in case the computer went down or the projector didn't work or all those other things. Or I wasn't there. And the immortal words of Jay Riggs, never break a sweat until you've redoed it twice. Well, you'll notice I'm dripping here. So, that's post-traumatic stress, Jay. Exactly. So, but, you know, I guess my role here this morning, now that I've already killed 5 minutes of my 10, is to kind of set the scene for this. And it all goes back, you know, when we look at stormwater in Minnesota, it all begins with the NPDES program. And the beginnings of that was in the 70s where we were going after point source pollutants, the wastewater treatment plants, the heavy industries and things like that. And then in the 80s, we started thinking non-point source becomes an issue. So in the wisdom of the folks in Washington, Congress directed the EPA to develop regulations that affected stormwater. And this is kind of the beginning of everything. So those 1987 amendments to the Clean Water Act created NPDES Phase 1. And that threshold was 5 acres or above. And the key critical thing in the history of Minnesota is that we were one of the first states to include a water quality factor in our general construction permit. Across the country, the permits that were initiated pretty much had nothing to do with water quality. They were pretty much all directed at erosion and sediment control coming off of construction sites. But in the land of 10,000 lakes, we decided that water quality was a big deal. And so we put a half-inch threshold of runoff coming off of impervious surfaces in our permit, and it was to be treated in a pond. And this was a big deal. This was, those of us that were part of those discussions back in the early 1990s can remember the battles with the people that said it couldn't be done. We can't put ponds in. We don't have the right of way. We don't have, a lot of reasons why we couldn't. But sure enough, next thing you know, we had ponds in our permit, and we were the first state in the country to do that. Then we wound up, okay, why did I quit working? Okay. Then right around 2000, phase 2 came along, and the Natural Resources Defense Council sued the EPA, and they said, why did you draw a line at 5 acres? And so this whole thing sent it down to 1 acre, and even more so, the common plan of development. So any projects that were less than 5 acres, or less than 1 acre, and the individual lots, the permit got handed down. And this was really a big deal for us. I mean, we all of a sudden the thresholds went crazy. This was also kind of a funny point of the SWIP, the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan. I can remember when this started that we had major discussions of what do we call it. Is this a SWPPD? Or is this a SWIPy? Or is it a SWIP? And finally, after years of discussion of what we're going to call it, we came up with a SWIP. So about the same time in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, as we were writing these things, we started to become aware of this thing called low-impact development. We were starting to get a sense that you know, the ponds weren't working as well as we were hoping. And we started looking at things like the Center for Watershed Protection and Tom Schuler and the folks out in Prince George's County that were trying to disconnect stormwater. About the same time, some of us in the room got deeply involved in a thing called Project Nemo, non-point education for municipal officials, where we went out and taught land use decision makers. Doesn't it kill you these days when you look at that? And the blue in the background, too. Beautiful. Yeah, we use this slide a lot. But we spent a lot of time going around. This is the building boom, of course, and we spent a lot of time going around teaching city councils and planning commissions about the importance of natural resource protection, and while faced with the onslaught of new development. Same time, the Minnesota Erosion Control Association was very active in this. Jay just dug this thing out of an old suit when he was cleaning his closet over the weekend, literally, and now it will live in infamy. But you know, we were kind of combining the educational front with Nemo, Mika, lots of different folks involved. And then right about 2003, 2004. The Stormwater Steering Committee was formed by the Pollution Control Agency, and this was a group that was invited in to try to set the path for the next 20 years. We did a lot of meeting right here in this room, and as a result of that, the Minnesota Stormwater Manual was born. And to this day, it's with great pride. I mean, I played a role in helping to write it, as did a number of people here, but it's with great pride that I say that this is still the best stormwater manual in the business, and there isn't anybody else that even comes close to us in how we've treated our policy in the manual and kept it updated, and we should all be taking great pride in this. About the same time, you know, the manual was unique because it was the first one that looked at stormwater through a cold climate lens. And yeah, that really kind of set us apart and still does today. At the same time, we you know, became national experts and really role leaders in you know, doing stormwater across the country in North America. On to you.
On to other presentations. Excellent. So when Mike and Jay and Julie and I walked into this room this morning, I got this flashback of how many hours we spent in this room with a more collaborative configuration than this, working with a group of 40 to 50 people that met here every month for 3 years. And that group developed some pretty amazing standards, and the PCA is once again a national leader. And like Jay mentioned, the fact that Minnesota is doing this, and it's not driven by the Phase 1 NPS or the Phase 1 permits, is remarkable. Other parts of the country are doing some innovative stormwater management, but it's mostly CSO driven, mostly driven by their Phase 1 permits. Philadelphia and New York, Boston, in the West Coast as well. We're doing it because Minnesotans care about water resources and water quality. And we're doing a lot of retrofits in areas to meet TMDL goals. There are not a lot of parts of the country that are actually doing these things over time to actually achieve our water quality goals. So what we're doing here is unique. What we're doing here is innovative. And the fact that we have the statewide standard in place, a recommended standard, provides an opportunity for us to see how we can continue to adopt these to actually achieve our water quality goals versus just comply with their permits. Okay. Here we go. So this is a presentation that we've given 100 times, 150 times. This is what is MIDS. So the MIDS came out of recognizing that there's this challenge with water resources. There's inconsistency in standards throughout the state. Minnesota has watershed organizations. We have county water plans. We have cities that have different standards. And so all these things are creating this complexity that's frustrating to the development community. We also have a lot of situations where the development community is not implementing practices well because they're frustrated and angry. There's actually legislation at the Capitol right now to reduce the authority of watersheds because people are frustrated and angry about the complexity and what they perceive as lack of flexibility. And so these are challenges that we're trying to deal with. We also have all this alphabet soup of regulations that people get confused about. When people get confused, especially when it's keeping them from doing what they want to do, they get mad and they fight you. And that doesn't result in good stormwater management. It doesn't result in good long-term management of stormwater. We also are recognizing, as Jay mentioned, that traditional stormwater ponding is not effectively helping us achieve our water quality goals. We did have good NERD programs from the beginning because Walker did a lot of his work here in Minnesota, and so that's one of the reasons we have been implementing all these ponds over the years, is because of the connection with the guy who developed the model as part of the NERD program. Jay, did you do that with him? No, you weren't a consultant. You were doing blacktop work at that point, right? Yeah, he didn't mention that on his resume. And we're learning more and more and more about how stormwater ponds, do provide rate control, but sometimes the sources of phosphorus, they don't deal with the soluble phosphorus, they don't deal with the increased loading and from increased volume of runoff from development sites. And so there was some. In 2008, the National Academy of Science recommended we have to do practices more distributed on the site. And this is kind of in result to a lot of conversations like Jay was mentioning and conferred discounting, the LID manual, and better site design. So all this frustration with the lack of consistency came, and what we should do about that actually came out of the head of Randy Neefrash. He went to a conference, I think Chicago. He came back from this conference inspired. What we need is this thing that's going to create this standard that's consistent that we can apply on a statewide basis. And so he prepared the proposal, the concept, to the Stormwater Steering Committee, and which is a collaborative group that was around for quite a few years that Jay's going to talk a little bit more about, right? No. Ano means yes in Slovak, so. And so the Stormwater Steering Committee took this concept and tried to run with it. We applied for some grants, we supported some approaches, created a low impact development work group that Western was the chair of forever. And so then one day, so this concept actually didn't get legs. It didn't get funded. We got partial funding for some pieces of it. Then one day I got a call from Lisa Burnett, who was a lobbyist for the Builders Association of the Twin Cities. Lisa Burnett called me and said, okay, Jay, you're one of my favorite stormwater geeks. I got a call from a senator who said he really likes rain gardens. Actually, it's his wife who really likes rain gardens because the Anoka Conservation District cost shared with them and did a rain garden on the property. So she asked him, well, why don't we have more of these around? So the senator then asked Lisa Burnett, why don't we have more of these into development? And Lisa's like, I'll talk to my stormwater people. So Lisa calls me, and she's like, well, we have this MIDS thing, this Randy Neefrash proposal that we'd love to pitch and get this moving, get this funded. And 2 days later, we were at the Capitol sitting at, and a lot of you in this room, quite a few of you, were at that meeting where we're sitting with the senator, and then the senator says, well, let's draft up some legislation and work with the PCA. 2 days later, we had draft legislation that was mixed. And that became Senate File 1892 and House File 2133. Westerland went and testified to this thing. How many times did you testify for this?
Oh, only a couple.
Only a couple times?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fun.
Yeah, so I testified the first one. All I remember is like we're all super nervous because we've not really experienced testifying to the legislature. Westerland's like, it's going on. Hey, stop doing that. So I went out there and I'm like, I had my 30 seconds of testifying, and then Westerland did the rest of the testifying for that whole process. And she single-handedly kind of walked this thing through the process with Lisa Burnett in the background kind of guiding all of us. The bill passed. And so that was 2011, the bill passed. And it created this statewide program to develop this standard. So to develop performance standards, design standards, or other tools to enable and promote the implementation of low-impact development and other stormwater management. And LID is this approach to stormwater that mimics natural hydrology as the landscape is developed. Okay, and the calculation of pre-development. John, what was that? Jana, what was this? What's the calculation of pre-development? It's based on native soil and vegetation to try to mimic natural hydrology in after post-development situations. That came almost directly out of the Klondike Development Manual of Prince George's County, because their goal was to match pre and post-development curve numbers. How do you match pre and post-development curve numbers? You have to do innovative stormwater management. So there was actually funding associated with the legislation, $480,000. And so we went through phase 1 and phase 2. That's when the MIDS work group came together. The goal of this then, we recognized the components of MIDS were to develop the performance standard. What is that standard? The credit calculator. How do we actually look at a site, model the BMPs, and then get them installed? And then the community assistance package was this thing of like how do local units of government adopt the standard and the calculator to actually get things adopted and implemented at the local level. These we knew were critical components of having this thing be successful. So the goal, the calculator, the minefield. So we had this MIDS work group. It was consensus-based, as I mentioned. I think I mentioned before. This graphic doesn't work well. It's going to be super animated because I switched to, I'm too cheap to have Microsoft Office on my laptop, so I have freeware, so this is what happens when you convert to free software. But anyway, this is yes, everybody agreed to this MIDS standard. And Lois is the question mark who then became yes. Remember Lois, who retired recently. Oh, not quite. Retiring soon. Yes. And so my graphic here, could you turn this off? I need to actually drag something. Because in my process of editing this document, you can see the S's, but I did it that I was working on at 8 o'clock this morning. I just turn off the presentation. So stay out of that. I just get up here. 30 seconds. Okay. Okay, and this is the standard. So the standard that came out of this work group, guys, do you want to explain how this happened? Lots of modeling, lots of science happened, and it was awesome, and we talked about it a lot. For 3 years. 3 years it took us to get to this. But this equates to about a 95th percentile. Now, the foundation for this was to meet NPCA EPA requirements of anti-degradation, and also if it's implemented as a redevelopment standard, as a way to get further reductions to TMDL goals. Okay? That was the foundation for this whole process, was to help the state meet your requirements. Okay. Yes, I do. Awesome. Thank you. So we came up with this new nonlinear developments that create more than 1 acre of new impervious shall have a 1.1 inch volume control requirement. We said nonlinear because at that time we didn't know what we were going to do with linear projects, but we wanted to have a standard. Then we developed a linear standard, which actually gets back to the flexible treatment option that Mike's going to talk about. MIDS is voluntary and MIDS is flexible. MIDS recognizes that you can't do 1.1 inch volume control on all sites. And it's difficult in some redevelopment areas, almost impossible in a lot of linear projects. So MIDS does that. Voluntary and flexible. If anybody complains about MIDS or says that it's this mandate, remind them that it is what? Voluntary and flexible. Exactly. Good. Thank you. Now, we have this great stormwater manual, and as we're moving forward with this process, recognizing I'm like 30 seconds from done, that we can integrate all of this into the stormwater manual. And this is our avenue for that delivery to who's going to use this. We have the stormwater manual, and then it developed the calculator. And we wanted to make sure that the MS4 communities knew that they could use, if they did MIDS, that it would help them comply with their permits. So we worked, and how long did it take to get the letter? 3 years, yeah. Almost the whole time?
Yeah, almost the whole time.
But in May, almost, yeah. May 14th, yeah. 2014. Mm-hmm. Wow. We got the letter from TCA saying if communities adopt MIDS, it helps them comply with their permanent stormwater management requirements. It can be used as their waste load allocation. can be used to achieve waste load reductions as specified in the TMDL, especially if it's done for redevelopment load reductions. Which, by the way, which is why Ramsey, Washington Metro and Capital Region, they went through their whole standards process. How many years?
2006 is when we started.
2006, they did a joint rules process. They developed a 1-inch volume control standard that also was required in redevelopment, not as flexible as and the redevelopment requirement, because they did their models, the only way that they could achieve their TMDL goals was to require that volume control standard for redevelopment. That's so the 1.1 inch or 1-inch volume control standard for new development helps achieve any day, and the 1.1 inch volume control requirement for redevelopment helps achieve TMDL goals. Because any day means not make it worse. So you're just when you're developing, you're dealing with increased volume of runoff from the site. I mean, literally on a 25-acre site, if you go from woods on these soils to 4-acre residential, you're going to end up with about 12 million gallons more water per year, even if you have good stormwater plants. Okay. So then to develop the community assistance package, we ran out of money, and we're able to get a 319 grant thanks to, it was a 319 grant.
Yeah, I remember.
I did all the reporting on that. Jay was like, it was a 319 grant? What's that? And I'm like, yep. I was like, just got paid. So we did a pilot project to actually develop the community assistance package, and then I'm handing it out to Jay again.
Okay. Can we go back to that other presentation? So the community assistance package really started right here in this building. Back when we were going in the NPDES Phase 2, and Gene Soderbeck, who was the supervisor of the Stormwater group at that time, came down one day with the idea at one of our staff meetings that we needed a model ordinance to hand off NPDES Phase 2 to communities, because we realized that this was too overwhelming at a statewide level with, at that point, only 3 of us, Mike, myself, and Pete Cherry Holmes, running around trying to enforce this thing. So we started doing things, we did the model ordinance, we got some educational programs out where we were trying to call the E-teams, where we were trying to coordinate with local units of government, and then it all kind of evolved into this document. It was from Policy to Reality. It was a whole packet of model ordinances. It was originally put out in 2003 or 2000 by the Environmental Quality Board, the EQB, and Gene Coleman, who was with CR Planning back at that point, her husband Brian Ross, were very instrumental in putting this together. So we added the stormwater and the erosion and sediment control sections to that, and then over the course of time we would find money to update it. Julie was with the DNR. We got a little pool of, to kind of keep it current and keep it up to date. So it evolved into the community assistance package, which is about a 125-page document that is designed to help communities adopt this. You'd think that would be enough of a tool, but we're going to talk about the rest of the story here in just a second with Mike. The whole concept of the community assistance package and everything that we built is built in Schuler's world of better site design. This goes back to the early days of LID, and it's thinking about what we're doing and how we're doing it, as opposed to just going out and putting a one-dimensional project on the ground. It starts with thinking about what can we preserve, what can we build around, and especially when we're talking LID, where are the soils that we can design around that are going to get water back down into the ground? How can we reduce impervious cover? How can we disconnect the impervious cover that we've got? And how can we use our pervious areas to help treat stormwater? So in the end, the model ordinance that we came up with was designed to help implement the performance standards, the 1.1 inches of runoff off of impervious surface and the credit calculator into it, provide standards for managing both the velocity and the volume of runoff, trying to maximize infiltration all the way across the state, where we've got bedrock in Duluth to the Anoka sand plain to the heavy dark soils of southwestern Minnesota. We've got to think of the 7 months that we have winter, and how do we manage snow, or how do we manage stormwater when it's frozen. The use of vegetation is evolving into the whole thing, the amount and types of impervious surfaces. And then, you know, that I often tell people that the MIDS model is, you know, everybody makes a big deal out of the 1.1 inches and the standards and the flexible treatment options, but there's a big part of this model that is built from practical experience of where, you know, something went wrong and we didn't have financial securities in place. And you know, the little things that take up 20, you know, the standards are about 3 pages of a 23-page document. The rest of it is all about maintenance and scheduling land disturbing activities, maintaining soil stability, inspections, financial securities, all the rest of these things. That has proven to be very, very workable over the years and has been evolving since the first day that it came up back in 1998 or 1999. So, Mike?
All right. So I grabbed the community assistance package and the work that had been done and minimal impact design standards and worked with the 10-member communities of Middle St. Croix WMO during our 2015 plan update process. One of the big pieces that we had for feedback during our stakeholder involvement process was that the local units of government were really looking for standards that were simpler, that were easier to understand, they were consistent with other places in the metro, so when developers came to town, they didn't feel like they were starting from scratch, and that they were flexible. So the bids was in place, it really met those goals, but the other piece that for the 10 communities along Lake St. Croix, that we don't really have to convince local elected leaders that stormwater management is important because of the impacts it has to Lake St. Croix, which is a primary driver of the economies for those small communities along the lake. So the big piece working with the 10-member communities starting in 2015 was kind of reestablishing how MIDS came about. And this was that MIDS work group that met here for those 3 years. And pieces of MIDS were moved forward through consensus, as Jay had pointed out, and consensus is achieved when you don't have somebody with a burning disagreement with the standards. And so we got that done. But to the Middle St. Croix communities, those are really the big pieces that were the most important because it is consistent, flexible, and achievable. So really what we added to our standards by adopting this is we added infiltration and filtration standards as well as stormwater disconnect, a large portion of our watershed. On the southern portion is large plot urban development. So stormwater disconnect is a major tool for a lot of those larger lots. And then, but the relationship that our watershed management organization has with our communities is a WMO actually doesn't have enforcement authority, so we don't have any permit programs. Instead, we depend on the regulatory programs of our communities. So the first thing that we did for adopting this is we took a look at all of the existing ordinances in those 10 communities. And in that evaluation, we found that some of the communities had stormwater ordinance regulations. Most of them weren't quantifiable; they were more qualitative statements in the ordinance. And then the quantitative measures that we had actually in ordinance were really more focused around rate control from the 1980s and 1990s. Then there really wasn't an alternatives process in place. If you couldn't achieve your stormwater management goals with the ordinance, there wasn't a standardized process about how development reviews move through the process for erosion and sediment control and stormwater management. There were financial securities as part of the community's ordinances, but they were fairly inaccessible if it was a stormwater or a land development based issue. And so we wanted to kind of shore that up to make sure that the enforcement authority and the financial securities were all kind of tied together around that stormwater management, erosion, and sediment control. So all of those items are addressed in the community assistance package, and it actually, the 125-page document is actually 3 three kind of model ordinance approaches. The short form, which is really kind of meant to slide in for communities that actually have pretty well-formed ordinance packages around stormwater erosion and sediment control already, and it just inserts critical components for MIDs, so that was applicable for Oak Park Heights. For the medium form, is a little bit more robust, has more of those, has more components in it around securities and financial measures, and more definitions, et cetera. And so that was really applicable for the communities that had ordinance updates in the 1990s, late 1990s, but we were just kind of transitioning them kind of for the next biennium or for the next decade. And so that was the medium form. And the long form was the majority. Really, that was a lot of 1980s ordinances. And so we really just needed, what we honestly did is we went through, removed the stormwater language, changed the references to its own chapter, and then created a stormwater chapter out of the long form from the community assistance package. The process of working with communities started in 2014. Probably one of the biggest things that we did well is we had a ordinance preview with all of the attorneys of communities, so we could identify potential issues on the front end of the ordinance updates instead of the back end after the process. So that occurred in 2014 was how we kicked it off, and then we worked on through 2015 and 2016 through a Clean Water Fund grant to actually do all of the work to update those 9 communities' ordinances. And at the end of that process, we had yeses in all of those categories. So the Middle St. Croix MID standard is a little bit different from the statewide standard. Our trigger for MID is actually 6,000 square feet of newer reconstructed impervious surface. But then from that point, it adheres to the 1.1 inch or the 0.55 inch for linear projects. We also require drainage and utility easements that are required to be submitted as part of the review process, as well as when reported operations and maintenance agreements. And the reason we have these thresholds is because we're trying to achieve our 1,521 pound TMDL load reduction for Lake St. Croix in this 19 square miles. So it can like run the numbers on it. It's a lot of BMPs over the short amount of time. We're out of the next 20 to 30 years when we'd like to actually get that done. So flexible treatment options were a big deal in the Middle St. Croix. So again, just a quick overview of those. Most sites actually have to comply with the 1.1 inch. John, you'll probably recognize these slides. A lot of this presentation actually came from BAR, which is awesome. Makes my job a lot easier. And then a flexible treatment option number 1 is necessary, for example, if you have tight soil, so you can't achieve a full 1.1 inch volume reduction, then if you demonstrate that, then we can move to half the required volume control and 75% total phosphorus reduction. If you have issues like contaminated soils, then we move to flexible treatment option number 2, which is a 60% annual PP load reduction, total phosphorus load reduction. And then at a local unit of government scale, we also have circumstances where we have to go to flexible treatment option number 3, where there really just isn't an opportunity at that location for stormwater treatment. And so then we look for alternate locations within the same contributing watersheds for projects in the future. And so we've got 2 of those going on right now. So I just want to share the results for fully implementing this in 2016 and 2017 in the Middle St. Croix. So our 10-member communities had 30 projects that required stormwater treatment during that period. 80% of those projects achieved that full 1.1 or 0.55 inch volume control standard. 20% utilized flexible treatment options. So flexible treatment option number 1 was we needed for 2 projects. One because we had karst that came up in the soil borings, and so we can't really rely just on exfiltration for those basins. Then the other one was clay soils, and then the drivers for flexible treatment option number 2 projects, fueling station contaminated soils, and then high special groundwater. Areas where we can't get infiltration. We couldn't get our 3 feet separation from special groundwater on one project. So what does that mean as far as load reductions for us moving forward, meeting anti-DAG as well as addressing our TMDL load reductions? The new development projects were this was modeled through the MIDS calculator, or estimated through the MIDS calculator, because it's not really a model. So that's my disclaimer there. 20% new development was a reduction of 27 pounds. Our redevelopment standard generated 131 pounds during that 2-year period of total phosphorus reduction. Not all of that directly discharges to the St. Croix, but our whole water set is the St. Croix, so that some actually go through other surface waters on their way to Lake St. Croix. Just a note too, so we're not only doing regulatory, we also do voluntary incentive projects and voluntary retrofitting. And so in that same 2-year period, we achieved 58 pounds additional load reduction with that. So if we add it together, we got about 180 pounds total. So when we take away the disconnected areas, we achieved about 7% of our total load reduction for the Lake St. Croix TMDL in that first 2-year period of having MIDS in place. So what's been working well with MIDS, definitely the flexible treatment options. We also, as part of the ordinance update, and part of this package is documenting post-construction as-builds, which is an issue that we were having with a lot of projects in the past. That's been working especially well, and then it really is a much more efficient review process. Things that we're continuing to work on, the design community, there are some designers that are excellent. We get plans that come in and meet all of the guidance that we have set in place in the stormwater manual, but we do have quite a bit of iterative design process going on with some of the consulting, some consultants for civil design for these infiltration and filtration facilities. We also still struggle with quality of installation from the contracting community, trying to get them working at the end, following the specifications that are in the plan, and then working with our communities to make sure that now that we have reported operations and maintenance plans, that those are actually getting implemented. The big question that I get a lot from local elected officials is this actually working? So we're putting a lot of dollars, a lot of time and effort into this process, and we haven't really had a firm answer, but one of the pieces that of data that we do have is we currently have the water quality trends in Washington County from 2008 to 2017 as part of the MPCA 10-year water monitoring cycle for their that they're currently starting. And in Washington County, we have 49% of our water bodies that are showing a long-term improving trend. I think that's pretty convincing that things are working. We have 39% of the waters, or 20 waters, that have sufficient data to identify a trend as not improving, but not getting worse. And then we've got 6 of those that are getting worse. And I can tell you that of the 6, I know of one, and one actually it might be contributing to trout stocking, actually, increasing the phosphorus in the lake. So anyway, at any rate, it's a complicated picture to paint. I have actually requested the previous 10 years of data as well, because I'm curious what that looks like, and I've been told that I'm going to get that data tomorrow, so it's one day too late for the presentation. But I'm following up on that. So that's what we've got from the local level, and I'll pass it off to Jay.
Keep that one up for just a minute.
Oh, that's Jay.
Oh, sorry, Jay.
Yeah. I memorized the schedule. So, in 2013, many of you came with us to a major party, one of the best parties I've ever been at, the International Low Impact Development Symposium, where we had 1,000 people from around the world all come to St. Paul and talk live till all hours of the night. I don't know if anybody slept for a week, but
Who's there in the room?
we
saw Neil Weinstein do his special dance.
Yeah, we're all grimacing. One of the things you can remember. But as a result of that, we ran into a fellow by the name of Mike Walters, who at that point had a major problem up in Toronto. There's a lake about an hour north of Toronto called Lake Simcoe, which is about the size of Lake Mille Lacs. Actually, it's a little bit bigger than Lake Mille Lacs, and it is the promised land of new development in the Toronto area. They're literally building freeways to the promised land that are plugged the minute they open them up. Between here and 2030, they're expecting 30,000 new acres of development going on. And this isn't the kind of Woodbury development that we see where it's 5 or so units per acre. It's 8 to 12 units per acre. It's dense, and there's nowhere to put stormwater when you look at the density of all this. They started, kind of followed the same course we did with ponds, NERC studies, all the rest of this, and adopted it. And then they started noticing the decline of the lake. And this is a deep water, cold water fishery with trout streams coming into it that are all on the bubble of development. And so they also started discovering that their maintenance issue on these ponds was being completely ignored, and it was going to cost them a fortune to come in and start getting back to where they should have been. They also discovered that in many cases in August, they were actually feeding phosphorus into the lake as a result of the stormwater pond. So Mike took great interest in our MIDS effort here and the stormwater manual, and so we formed a work group of the 23 different communities that make up the watershed to Lake Simcoe. We had the Ministry of the Environment, all of the regulatory agencies at the table. This was a really big deal, and we met monthly, sometimes twice a month, to go through the model ordinances, to try to take the MIDS community assistance package and put it in Canadian terms, if you will. And as a result of that, we came up with a model bylaw. All of the communities signed on to it in agreement, all 23 of them, and it became policy on September 1st, 2016. Now, the interesting part of this is that this is the first step of an initiative that it's beyond my wildest dreams of trying to control phosphorus going into a water body, and it's their phosphorus offset program, which went into effect January 1st of this year. So we've got 30,000 acres of very dense development going on, and all of a sudden the developer has to pay for the amount of phosphorus that he can't take out. So if he's got a sandy area and he can soak it all in, that check isn't going to be too bad. But their soils are pretty much like ours. And so when we look at the flexible treatment options, and it's MIDS verbatim when it comes to that, they have to run it through their version of the MIDS calculator, which we have gone back and forth on, and actually we're using the MIDS calculator right now because their version didn't work out very well. But they're charging an offset charge of $17,500 a pound for any phosphorus that they can't take out through the development process. And so this money goes into a retrofit fund, for a fund to help retrofit existing infrastructure around the lake, and we're expecting that it's going to be between $18 and $25 million a year that we will have available to be doing that. The cool part of this thing is that it's actually gotten legs of its own with everything, all of the work that we did in Lake Simcoe. It's set the path for the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change in all of Ontario, which basically their rules are NERC right now. And this is right now there's a guidance document that is on the verge of coming out for public review that takes MIDS and drops it into the provincial policy for all of Ontario and moving MIDS into the next level. We're moving their stormwater management into the next level. It's all yours, Jay.
Okay, so as Mike mentioned, where we're learning right now and what we're trying to improve is the installation, design, installation, and maintenance of the practices. How are we dealing with that? One other thing that came out of the Stormwater Steering Committee is a research group that's now centered at the U that actually is getting some funding to do research to help with the design of these practices. Installation, Mike is hounding people
every day.
Yeah. We can always use help with trying to help contractors install these. So we're doing a lot of trainings with contractors in addition to making sure that we have good inspections during installation. And for maintenance, actually in Washington County, we've developed a collaborative maintenance program. We're working with cities to actually hire parks-like crew to go out and maintain a lot of these vegetated practices. The cities aren't very good at doing that, so we've collaborated with multiple watersheds, the county highways, and the conservation district, and those St. Croix is kind of taking the lead on that process. So we're implementing, because we're at the implementation phase of this process. We have the federal regulations in place. We have good support from PCA. I want to recognize how important the Clean Water Act and support from PCA is for this whole process. This would not have happened without your support. So I want to recognize Ann, yes, Mike Trojan, thank you. Okay, anybody who else am I missing who is, it's like working on this stuff in the trenches to help us at the local unit of government get these practices in the ground to help us achieve our water quality goals, because it's not about the permit. It's not about a checkbox. It's about our quality of life, and it's about our water resources. And so with your help, we are able to actually implement these practices, and we're having to live with them. Okay, so how do we move MIDS to the next level? Because MIDS is not stopped. MIDS is actually moving forward and has been since the legislation was passed. So what's the next phase? We're trying to get them integrated into more local watershed management plans. Valley Branch has a permit standard that's very almost identical to MIDS. John? Yeah. Mill St. Croix copied the Valley Branch standard, so thank you. Yep. And South Washington has what would actually functionally a comparable standard, right, Jim? Yes. Okay. Mostly. Or other standards are even stricter, because like in Carmar, they have a lot of depressional areas where they need to have a stricter volume control to deal with a lot of those issues. Okay. So we're adopting those in Washington County. So how do we get those practices adopted at a larger scale? How do we integrate that? And actually, can you switch to the other presentation? 2015, yep. There we go. Okay. Since we've been talking about how do we potentially integrate MIDS into this planning process that's underway with Bowser called One Watershed, One Plan. And I didn't even have to create a slide for this, because this came out of the 2015 thing that we did for the Association of Conservation Districts. Because it seems like a logical opportunity for us. The state of Minnesota is going through a planning process, and over how many years is the state going to be covered by One Watershed, One Plan? 2025. By 2025, the entire state is going to have watershed plans in place that integrate all the county water plans, conservation district work, the 30% of the state that also have watershed districts, and we're implementing one in Washington County now in collaboration with 15 other local units of government in the lower St. Croix One Watershed, One Plan, where we have, it's like probably 15 to include all the LGUs, but 16 of them are actively participating in developing a framework for implementing watershed management at the HUC 8 scale, approximately-ish, right? So there's how many over the whole state?
52 right now.
Thank you. So Melissa, Julie, thank you. And so this is an opportunity for the state, because you're a mandatory participant in the One Watershed, One Plan planning process. This is an opportunity for PCA and other entities to really look at how do we actually move forward and meet our anti-DEG and our TMDL requirements. It's about implementing practices. And over time, it's about voluntary retrofits, working with landowners to do these things, and where we have permit opportunities to integrate standards like MIDS. So this is something we've been thinking about a little bit, that MIDS is a good way to kind of connect. Oops. Dude. I don't know.
Two things together.
Oh,
so, okay.
See,
all right, got it.
yeah, so it's not probably safe from a fire code perspective. But we're making the fire folks angry sometimes in our streets, so we're used to dealing with that. But One Watershed, One Plan, TMDLs and RAPs can all be connected to One Watershed, One Plan through adoption of MIDS, because it really deals with those land use decisions, land use changes that happen. So we can, I think, stage and utilize this opportunity in One Watershed, One Plan to really promote MIDS on a statewide basis. Because Jay's been trying to run around the state to get this implemented, and it's challenging. It's challenging when there isn't a watershed plan in place. It's challenging when there isn't someone like Mike getting a grant and then working with them literally, because there are so many barriers to adopting MIDs at the local level. When you talk to a local administrator, they're like, oh my God, the legal fees, cost for the legal analysis, the engineers are not going to know what to do. There's all these political things. But you can see from how successful Mike was, because he provided support. He worked with legal counsel up front. He worked